The eviction notice was a crisp, white rectangle of doom. It sat on my chipped formica table, marking the half-eaten can of beans beside it. My landlord, a man whose breath always smelled of stale cigarettes and regret, had given me a week. 1 week to find a new place, to conjure rent from thin air, to escape the suffocating confines of my shoebox apartment. My life felt like a perpetually deflating balloon, all hope seeping out with every passing day. Then the letter arrived. Thick cream-colored parchment, sealed with a crest I didn't recognize. The postmark was smudged, but it looked vaguely provincial, miles from anywhere I'd ever been. Inside, the legal jargon was dense, a labyrinth of words designed to confuse and intimidate. But one phrase stood out, glinting like a shard of glass in the muck. To my sole surviving descendant, Raj, I bequeath Blackwood Manor and all its attendant riches. Blackwood Manor. Name itself sounded like a Gothic novel. The accompanying documents, however, were far more concrete. A deed, notarized and official, detailing a sprawling estate in a region I'd only ever seen on faded maps. The lawyer's contact information was a stark contrast to the archaic script of the will, a modern email address, and a mobile number. A brief, perfunctory email followed, confirming the details and urging me to visit the property at my earliest convenience. It mentioned a substantial trust fund, accessible only after a period of residency. Immense wealth. The words echoed in my mind, drowning out the landlord's threats. I packed what little I owned into my ancient hatchback. The journey was long, the landscape gradually shifting from familiar urban sprawl to rolling hills and then to dense, untamed forest. The roads narrowed, the asphalt giving way to gravel, then to a rutted track that seemed to actively resist my progress. Branches scraped against the car's paintwork like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, carrying the damp, earthy scent of decay. Blackwood Manor finally loomed into view, a hulking silhouette against a bruised twilight sky. It wasn't just dilapidated, it was defeated. Turrets sagged like tired shoulders, windows were dark, vacant eyes, and the stone walls were choked with ivy, a green shroud clinging to its dying form. A wrought iron gate, rusted and half off its hinges, groaned in protest as I pushed it open. The driveway, barely discernible beneath a carpet of fallen leaves, led to a grand but crumbling portico. The key, a heavy, ornate thing, turned in the lock with a grating shriek. The massive oak door creaked inward, revealing an interior shrouded in gloom and the suffocating scent of dust and disuse. Moonlight, filtering through grimy panes, illuminated a cavernous hall. I moved through the echoing spaces, my footsteps unnervingly loud on the decaying floorboards. Furniture lay draped in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the dim light. A second staircase, narrower and seemingly carved directly into the stone foundation, led downwards. The will had mentioned a specific place to start. Seek the beginning of the descent, it read, where the house first draws breath. I found myself standing before the entrance to this lower stairwell. It was a stark contrast to the grand ascent. The steps were uneven, rough-hewn stone, slick with an indefinable dampness. This was the stairwell that goes down further than it should. The phrase from the will, cryptic and unsettling, pulsed in my memory. It felt like the house was watching me, its ancient timbers groaning a silent welcome or perhaps a warning. I gripped the cold stone railing, my palms slick with sweat. A sudden gust of wind, though I couldn't feel any draft, swept through the hall, rustling the sheets on the furniture and extinguishing the small flashlight I held. I was alone, in a house I didn't know, at the precipice of something I couldn't comprehend. Did I dare to take the first step down? The lawyer's number was a crisp, modern thing, utterly at odds with the crumbling parchment and faded ink that had brought me here. I'd called him, of course, a whirlwind of legal jargon and excited promises. He'd been efficient, almost too much so, confirming the inheritance, the staggering debt attached, and the vague but enticing stipulations. A distant relative indeed, a ghost in the lineage. He'd stressed the isolation, the remoteness, as if to prepare me for the silence that would greet me. He wasn't wrong. Blackwood Manor. It wasn't just a name, it was a physical presence that pressed in on me the moment I turned off the main road. The gravel drive, choked with weeds, crunched under my tires like brittle bones. The trees, ancient and gnarled, formed a suffocating canopy, blotting out the late afternoon sun. And then the house itself. It loomed, a hulking silhouette of dark stone and shadowed windows, its grandeur long since surrendered to decay. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and something something damp and earthy like a forgotten cellar. My footsteps echoed unnervingly in the cavernous foyer. Cobwebs, heavy as shrouds, draped the furniture. But it was the other stairwell that drew my eye. A simple, unadorned wooden door, slightly ajar. I pushed it open. A blast of cold air, surprisingly sharp for the mild autumn day, hit my face. It carried a faint, metallic tang like old coins or dried blood. The steps were stone, worn smooth by generations of feet, and they descended into an absolute inky blackness. I could hear the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere far below, a maddeningly slow rhythm. Only the echo answered, bouncing back at me, distorted. I told myself it was just an old house. Old houses had basements, cellars, places for storage. This was just more so. The will mentioned a vault, a place to secure valuables. Perhaps this led to it. I took a tentative step down, my boot scraping against the stone. Back upstairs, the silence was a palpable thing. It pressed against my eardrums, amplifying the creaks and groans of the house settling. I spent the first few hours in a flurry of activity, trying to impose order on the chaos. Unpacking boxes, airing out rooms, trying to ignore the persistent feeling of being watched. The wind outside began to howl, a mournful sound that rattled the ancient window panes. Later that evening, as I sat in the vast, echoing drawing room, a faint melody drifted from somewhere upstairs. A tinkling, childlike tune, like a music box long forgotten. I froze, straining to hear. It was delicate, almost ethereal, but it sent a prickle of unease crawling over my skin. I'd explored the upper floors already, or so I thought. There were no music boxes. I stood, my legs feeling heavy, and moved towards the grand staircase. The music grew louder as I ascended, guiding me. It seemed to emanate from a room at the end of the west wing, a room I'd barely glanced at, its door firmly shut. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling slightly. As my fingers brushed against the brass, the music abruptly stopped. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and shallow. Hesitantly, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was a nursery frozen in time. A rocking horse stood sentinel in the center, its painted eyes staring blankly. A crib draped with tattered lace sat in the corner, and on a small, dusty table, a porcelain doll lay on its side, its glassy eyes seeming to follow me. Nothing else. No music box. Nothing that could have made that sound. I backed out slowly, my heart racing. I told myself it was the wind. Old houses played tricks. The acoustics were strange. As I made my way back downstairs, a floorboard creaked directly above me. I stopped, my eyes darting upwards. Yet the sound was distinct, the heavy tread of a foot. I held my breath, listening. Nothing, just the wind and the groan of the manor. Was it just the house? Or was something else stirring within its decaying walls? The lawyer's voice crackled through the receiver, a tinny echo in the cavernous hall. He spoke of clauses, of escrow, of a timeline that felt impossibly short. And as per the deceased's wishes, the entirety of the estate, including all accrued debts, falls to you, Mr. Raj. The sum he quoted was a number that made my head swim. It was more than I'd ever seen, more than I'd dared to dream. Enough for anything. He paused, then added, his tone shifting, there are, however, certain stipulations. The will is quite explicit. You must reside at Blackwood Manor for a minimum of 1 year, uninterrupted. Any departure, however brief, voids the inheritance entirely. Blackwood Manor, the name itself felt like a chill wind. I'd seen the photographs, of course. A hulking, Gothic monstrosity draped in ivy, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at a forgotten landscape. It was remote, miles from the nearest town, a place that time had seemingly abandoned. And I was to live there, alone for a year. For that kind of money, I told myself I could endure anything. A year was a blink of an eye. The connection went dead before I could ask another question. I looked around the grand foyer, at the dust motes dancing in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy windows. The air was stale, carrying the faint, unsettling scent of damp earth and something else, something vaguely metallic, like old pennies. Days bled into a week. The initial thrill of the inheritance had begun to fray at the edges, replaced by a gnawing unease. My phone signal was non-existent, a fact I'd discovered on my first attempt to call my parents. The landline, a clunky, Bakelite monstrosity, was equally useless, dead, utterly dead. I tried to keep busy, unpacking the few boxes I'd brought, trying to impose some semblance of order on the chaos. But the house resisted. Objects I placed on shelves would be found on the floor the next morning. Doors I distinctly remembered closing would be ajar. Little things, at first, easily dismissed as my own forgetfulness or the settling of an old house. Then came the sounds, not the groans and creaks of aged timber, but something more deliberate, scuttling noises from within the walls, like tiny claws scrabbling against plaster. A faint, rhythmic tapping that seemed to emanate from directly above my bedroom ceiling, always just as I was drifting off to sleep. I'd lie there, breath held tight in my chest, straining to decipher it. Was it a branch against the roof, a bird trapped in the attic, or something else? One afternoon, driven by a desperate need for fresh air, I ventured into the overgrown gardens. The air was heavy, humid, carrying the cloying perfume of decaying blossoms. Twisted, skeletal trees clawed at the bruised sky. As I walked deeper into the tangled wilderness, a sudden, sharp pain lanced through my ankle. I cried out, stumbling, and looked down. A thick, gnarled root, unseen beneath the moss, had snagged my shoe, but it wasn't the pain that sent a shiver down my spine. It was the root itself. It looked unnervingly like a skeletal finger, curled and grasping. Back inside, the sense of being watched intensified. It was a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, a feeling of unseen eyes tracking my every move. One evening, while exploring a disused wing of the house, I found myself in front of a heavy, iron-bound door. It was set into the wall at the end of a long, dimly lit corridor, a corridor that seemed to stretch on longer than it logically should. Curiosity, a dangerous companion in this place, tugged at me. I'd already discovered the main cellar, a damp, musty space filled with cobwebs and forgotten relics. This felt different, absolute and impenetrable. It sounded like my own name, but distorted, stretched, like a recording played backward. Raj, my heart hammered against my ribs. I scrambled back, my hands slick with sweat. I'd heard stories, of course, about old houses holding secrets, but this wasn't just a secret. This felt like a hunger. I retreated, my footsteps echoing unnervingly loud on the bare floorboards. I found myself at the top of a service stairwell, a narrow, winding ascent that led upwards into the gloom. I'd seen it before, but never paid it much mind. Tonight, however, it drew me. Hesitantly, I began to descend. The steps were made of rough-hewn stone, worn smooth by countless feet. It was a stairwell that went down further than it should. Much, much further. As I continued my descent, the temperature plummeted. My breath plumed in front of me. The air grew heavy, pressing in on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. And then I heard it again. It was a sound that promised pain, a sound that spoke of ancient, slumbering things. It was a sound that clawed at the edges of my sanity. I stopped, frozen, but the silence was worse. I was deep underground now, the light from above long gone. The floorboards of the landing groaned under my weight, a familiar complaint that no longer settled my nerves. It was just the house settling, I told myself, the timbers of this ancient place shifting with the damp night air. But the sound from below, a scraping, dragging noise that had sent me reeling back, still echoed in my mind. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't rats. It was something else, something that had been there in the darkness beneath the house. I stood at the precipice of the stairwell that goes down further than it should. The ornate banister, carved with leering, indistinct faces, felt cold and strangely greasy under my fingertips. My breath hitched. Raj, I fool, I thought. I came here for a fortune, not for ghost stories. But the sheer wrongness of that sound, that feeling of something ancient and malevolent stirring, had lodged itself deep in my gut. It was a writer's instinct, I told myself, a need to understand the narrative, to peel back the layers of this decaying edifice. My flashlight beam, a thin, wavering shaft of light, cut into the blackness below. The air here was different, heavy and cloying, carrying a faint, metallic tang that pricked at the back of my throat. It was the smell of old iron, I reasoned, or perhaps damp earth. But it was too potent, too pervasive. My writer's curiosity, a trait that had always been both my greatest asset and my undoing, began to gnaw at me. I had to know what was down there. The will, the cryptic clauses about unearthing what lies buried. Had they meant this descent into the earth itself? My fingers tightened on the flashlight, gripped tight. The house felt alive, a vast, breathing entity, and I was a trespasser in its deepest chambers. I took a tentative step down. The wood creaked, a long, drawn-out sigh. My boot landed on the next step, then the next. Each descent was a deliberate act of defiance, a challenge to the unseen force that seemed to emanate from the depths. The temperature dropped with every few steps. The scraping sound had stopped. Nothing. I reached a landing. The walls here were rough-hewn, ancient, unlike the paneling of the upper floors. The flashlight beam swept across them, revealing nothing but the pitted, weathered rock. Yet I felt a distinct sense of being watched. And then I saw it. It was crude, angular, and utterly alien. I'd seen something similar before, I thought, in a dusty, forgotten tome in the library, a symbol of warding or perhaps of binding my mind. Usually a well-ordered library of facts and fiction felt like a room where all the books had been thrown from their shelves. I traced the symbol with a trembling finger. A faint tremor ran through the floor beneath my feet. Was it the house, or was it me, my own body reacting to the sheer, palpable wrongness of this place? My gaze was drawn back to the stairwell. The scraping sound, it had come from further down. A primal fear, raw and unreasoning, screamed at me to turn back, to flee this place and never look behind me. But the rider in me, the investigator, was enthralled. This was it, the heart of the mystery. The symbol on the wall seemed to pulse in my peripheral vision. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, almost suffocating. My lungs burned with each shallow breath. What ancient secret was this house guarding, buried so deep in its foundations? The scraping stopped. Silence, thick and suffocating, pressed in. I held my breath, straining to hear anything over the frantic thrumming in my own chest. Just the house settling, I repeated, the mantra I'd been whispering to myself since I first stepped foot inside this decaying monument to a forgotten branch of my family tree. But the sound hadn't been the settling of old wood. It had been too deliberate, too heavy. My hand, slick with sweat, tightened on the banister. I had explored it once, a foolish venture fueled by the promise of hidden riches detailed in the lawyer's dry legal prose. The air had been stagnant, carrying the faint, unsettling scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic like old blood. I took a tentative step down, the floorboard protesting with a low, mournful creak. My eyes, accustomed to the dim light of the landing, strained to pierce the gloom below. Nothing moved, yet I felt it. A watching presence. It was a sensation I had become all too familiar with in this house. The feeling of unseen eyes tracking my every move, of a breath held just behind my shoulder. Now it was undeniable. Another step. I remembered Raj's cryptic note, tucked into the velvet lining of the antique jewelry box I'd found in the master bedroom. It watches, it waits, it feeds. I dismissed it as the ramblings of an eccentric old man, a desperate attempt to add a touch of mystique to his morbid inheritance. I forced myself to descend further into the stairwell that goes down further than it should. Each step was a deliberate act of defiance against the rising tide of panic. The walls, once perhaps plastered and painted, were now rough, exposed stone, slick with a persistent dampness that clung to my fingertips when I reached out for balance. The smell intensified earth, decay, and that persistent, sickening metallic odor. It was the smell of something that had been disturbed, something ancient and hungry. My boots scuffed against something on the step. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Slowly, I lowered my gaze. It wasn't a loose stone or a fallen piece of plaster. It was a small, tarnished silver locket. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to the woman in the faded photograph I'd found in the study, my great aunt Alara, the relative whose name was on the deed to this sprawling, decaying estate. Her eyes in the photograph were wide, filled with a profound sadness and a hint of fear. My fingers trembled as I reached for the locket. I tried to open it, but it was stuck fast. It seemed to emanate from the very stones around me, a mournful exhalation of ancient despair. It felt like it was freezing, solidifying in my veins. The sound was not from the house. It was from within it. They were directed, targeted. I didn't dare go after it. The feeling of being watched intensified, pressing down on me like a physical weight. It wasn't just a presence, it was an awareness, and it was looking directly at me. This house wasn't just old, it was alive, and it was claiming me. Why was it keeping me here? What did it want with the locket, with me? The banister felt slick and cold under my trembling fingers, a stark contrast to the burning heat in my gut. That sound. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a presence. A breath against my ear that wasn't there. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing the image of the endless, spiraling stairwell that goes down further than it should from my mind. It was just a trick of the light, a hallucination brought on by the dust and the isolation. It had to be, but the whisper, not words, not exactly, more like a feeling, a promise of something ancient and hungry. It prickled the hairs on the back of my neck. urging me to turn, to look down into the impassable depths of the stairwell that goes down further than it should. No, I wouldn't, I couldn't, I had to get out. I bolted from the landing, my boots echoing unnervingly on the bare wood. The heavy oak door, my only connection to the outside world, loomed before me. I lunged for the iron handle, my heart racing a desperate rhythm against my ribs. It was locked. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. It wouldn't budge. I threw my weight against it, my shoulder protesting with a dull ache. Nothing. The wood felt impossibly solid, fused with the frame as if it had grown there. Panic, sharp and metallic, began to bloom in my chest. I backed away, my eyes scanning the room for another exit. The tall, arched windows were barred, the ironwork a cruel mockery of security. A faint scent wafted from the direction of the dining room, something sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. It was a smell I'd noticed before, always when the house felt watchful. I dismissed it as decay, the natural odor of a place left to rot, but now it felt deliberate, a lure. I edged towards the dining room, my senses on high alert. The air grew heavier, thicker. The sweet scent intensified, almost suffocating. As I peered through the doorway, the faint light from the foyer barely illuminating the room, I saw it. On the long, polished mahogany table, where I'd last seen only dust and the faint outline of a long-vanished tablecloth, sat a single, perfect apple. It gleamed under an unseen light source, its skin a deep, inviting crimson. It looked impossibly fresh, as if it had just been plucked from a sun-drenched orchard. I hadn't eaten properly in days. This was it. The house was offering me sustenance. A peace offering or a trap. My mind raced. I remembered Raj's journal, his frantic scribbles about the house's offerings. He'd succumbed to them, hadn't he? He'd written about a strange peace, a surrender, but his final entries were a jumble of fear and regret, so I knew whatever peace it offered was a lie. Still, the hunger gnawed at me. The apple sat there, a beacon of impossible normalcy in this increasingly nightmarish reality. I took a step into the dining room. The floorboards creaked, the sound unnaturally loud. The apple seemed to pulse with a faint luminescence. It was so real, so tangible. My hand, as if possessed by a will of its own, reached out. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth skin of the apple. It felt real, solid. I could almost taste its crisp sweetness. Then a low hum started, vibrating through the floorboards, through my very bones. It was the same hum I'd heard when the house had sealed itself, when the windows had become bars. It grew louder, more insistent, accompanied by a faint, rhythmic thudding from somewhere deep within the walls. The apple in my hand suddenly felt heavy, unnaturally so. The crimson skin seemed to deepen, to writhe with a subtle internal movement. The sweet scent, which had been so inviting moments before, now turned acrid metallic. It smelled like blood. I snatched my hand back, the apple clattering onto the polished table. It didn't roll. The hum intensified, the thudding becoming a deafening roar. The room began to sway, the walls seeming to press inward. I stumbled back, my eyes wide, searching for an escape that wasn't there. The house was not just trapping me, it was playing with me, offering me a poisoned chalice and then revealing its true nature. What else did it have in store, and how much longer could I resist its insidious invitations? That sound. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing the image of the endless, spiraling stairwell that goes down further than it should to recede. It always receded, but never far enough. My breath hitched, a dry rasp in the oppressive quiet. The house. It was always the house. It breathed with me, or perhaps I breathed with it. The air itself felt thick, like wading through stagnant water, carrying the faintest, cloying scent of damp earth and something else, something like old pennies and decay. My resolve, once a solid shield, felt like brittle glass, ready to shatter with the slightest tremor, but I had to push. The will, the fortune, the escape, it all hinged on understanding what this place wanted, what it was doing to me. The staircase beckoned, a gaping more leading deeper into the unknown. It wasn't just a physical descent. It felt like a plunge into my own fractured mind. My knuckles were white where I gripped it, the rough wood biting into my skin. I could feel the house watching, its unseen eyes tracking my every move, its ancient heart beating in time with the frantic rhythm in my chest. I remembered the old caretaker, the one who'd given me the keys with a nervous tremor in his hand and a warning that had sounded like ramblings then. It remembers everything, he'd rasped, his voice thin as parchment. And it likes to show I dismissed it as the superstition of an old man worn down by the isolation. They flickered, ephemeral, just at the edge of my vision, gone before I could truly focus. The stairwell that goes down further than it should. The words echoed in my mind, a refrain sung by the house itself. It wasn't just a description, it was an invitation, a dare. I'd avoided it, of course, but the house was relentless. It fed on my fear, on my avoidance. It wanted me to go down. It needed me to go down. A faint light bloomed at the bottom of the stairwell, a sickly, greenish phosphorescence that seemed to pulse. The air grew heavy, carrying a new scent, now metallic, coppery, like fresh blood, overlaid with the musty odor of wet concrete. My palms began to sweat, slicking the banister further. I could feel a subtle vibration beneath my feet, a low thrumming that resonated deep in my bones. It felt like a giant, sleeping creature stirring in its slumber. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee into the relative safety of the upper floors, to barricade myself in the dusty library. But what was safety here? The only way out, I was beginning to suspect, was through the illusions, through the fear, through the very heart of this ancient, malevolent entity. My boots touched the bottom step. The light intensified, revealing not a floor but a vast, cavernous space. The walls here were not stone or plaster, but a slick, obsidian-like surface that seemed to absorb the light, reflecting nothing. And in the center of this impassable chamber, something pulsed. The coppery scent was overpowering now, thick and nauseating. I took a step forward, my boot crunching on something brittle. I looked down. It was a small porcelain doll, its painted eyes staring up at me with vacant, glassy intensity. It was a doll I'd had as a child, one I'd cherished, then inexplicably discarded. How had it gotten here? How had it become this? The faces of people I had disappointed, people I had hurt, people I had forgotten. They swirled around me, their silent accusations a suffocating weight. I could feel the house probing, seeking out the softest, most vulnerable parts of me. It wasn't just showing me my fears, it was amplifying them, twisting them into monstrous forms. My breath came in ragged gasps. The doll's eyes seemed to follow me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs were rooted to the spot, caught in the house's suffocating embrace. What was this place? What was that pulsing mass? The faces. They swirled in the periphery. Whispers of judgment carried on a breath that wasn't there. My own mother's, etched with a disappointment I'd never truly shaken. The girl from university, her eyes accusing, a ghost of a promise broken. Even the faces of strangers, fleeting glimpses of people I'd wronged in careless moments, now magnified, distorted by the house's hungry gaze. I squeezed my eyes shut, a futile attempt to banish them. But they were inside, weren't they? Etched behind my eyelids. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something acrid like burnt sugar. I stumbled backward, my hand finding the cold, rough stone of the wall. It was the same wall that had contained the pulsing mass. The same wall that felt like it was breathing. I needed to move, not just away from this chamber, but up, back towards the light, towards the world I'd left behind. My feet found the entrance to the stairwell that goes down further than it should. The air here was different, cooler, carrying a faint, metallic tang. I'd explored this descent before, driven by the lure of the will, by the promise of wealth that now seemed like a cruel joke. Now it was my only escape. I started to climb. The stone steps were uneven, worn smooth by time and countless unseen feet. Each riser was a victory, each tread a defiance. I focused on the faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air above, a hint of less stagnant atmosphere. My knuckles scraped against the rough-hewn walls as I ascended, the grit digging under my nails. You can't leave, you belong here, this is your inheritance. They slithered into my thoughts, insidious, familiar. The house knew my deepest insecurities, the cracks in my resolve, it fed on them. I gritted my teeth, pushing them away. Raj, just Raj. Not the heir, not the victim, just Raj. A sudden gust of wind, impossibly strong, whipped down the stairwell, extinguishing the small, sputtering candle I'd managed to keep lit. The temperature plummeted. My teeth chattered. The stone beneath my bare feet felt slick, as if coated in a thin film of dew. It wasn't dew. It was something viscous, clinging. This wasn't just a house. It was a trap, and I was its quarry. I fumbled for the lighter in my pocket, my fingers numb and clumsy. Nothing. The wick was damp. Useless. Panic began to claw at my throat. I could feel it now, a presence behind me. A palpable weight in the air, drawing closer. Not a physical form, but an intent. A hunger. I lunged upward, hands outstretched, desperate for any purchase. My fingers brushed against something yielding, something warm and disturbingly alive. I recoiled, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. Stay, serve, the mass in the chamber. It hadn't been contained, it had seeped, it had spread. And it was here, on the stairwell that goes down further than it should, waiting. I kicked out, my foot meeting resistance, a soft squelching sound. The air grew thick with that burnt sugar smell, stronger now, almost overpowering. My mind raced, the will, the wealth. It wasn't about money, it was about this, about the house's sustenance. It fed on despair, on fear, on the very essence of its inhabitants, and I had been willing, eager even, to give it all. I scrambled higher, my body a frantic blur of motion. The presence behind me was gaining. The steps seemed to stretch, an endless ascent into nothingness. But then, a faint glimmer, a sliver of light. The landing, I was almost there. With a final, desperate surge, I clawed my way onto the landing, collapsing onto the dusty floorboards. I lay there, gasping, my body trembling uncontrollably. The burnt sugar smell was fading, replaced by the familiar scent of dust and decay. But the silence was wrong. It was too complete. The house, which had always hummed with a subtle, unsettling energy, was now utterly still. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. The hall was as I'd left it, the furniture draped in white sheets, the air thick with neglect. But something was different. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer hung in the air, particularly near the grand staircase. It wasn't dust motes catching the light. It was thicker, more substantial. I took a tentative step towards the staircase, my eyes fixed on the shimmering distortion. The house was waiting. It had let me escape the stairwell, but not from its grasp. The silence wasn't peace. It was a snare. What was it doing now that I was back in its main domain? The squelching sound echoed, a sickening counterpoint to my ragged breaths. My boot had connected with something yielding, something that clung with a desperate, wet grip. I wrenched my leg free, a foul, earthy smell filling my nostrils, thick and cloying like rot and something else, something acrid, metallic. It coated the back of my throat. I could still feel the phantom pressure around my shin, a memory of the damp, suffocating embrace. My flashlight beam, a frantic dance of light, swept across the landing below. Nothing, only the oppressive, clinging darkness of the stairwell that goes down further than it should. The air itself felt heavy, viscous, pressing in on me, stealing the oxygen from my lungs. Each inhale was a struggle, a desperate gasp against an invisible weight. My muscles screamed with the effort of holding myself upright, my knees trembling. I hadn't gone down, not after the event. The will had promised wealth, a life beyond my wildest dreams, and I had chased it into this decaying maw. I had seen what lay at the bottom of that stairwell. I had felt it. It wasn't just a physical thing, this presence. It was woven into the very fabric of the house, a hungry, ancient thing that fed on fear. My fears. My mind replayed the last moments before I fled, scrambling back up the treacherous steps. The chamber, the substance, it had been contained, or so I had believed. A foolish, desperate hope. It had broken free, it had spread, and now it was here, a tangible manifestation of the house's malice, seeping from the depths, seeking new ground, seeking me. I backed away slowly, my eyes glued to the inky blackness of the stairwell, the resistance I'd felt. Squelching sound, it was the house itself, alive and resisting my escape. The walls seemed to pulse, a slow, rhythmic throb that vibrated through the soles of my worn boots. A low hum began, barely perceptible at first, then growing, filling the confined space, a resonant frequency that set my teeth on edge. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but one that vibrated in my bones, deep and unsettling. My fingers scrabbled at the rough-hewn stone of the wall, seeking purchase, seeking something solid to anchor me. The texture was clammy, slick with a dew that wasn't water. It felt oily. I recoiled, wiping my hand on my trousers, the phantom sensation of slime clinging to my skin. I had to get out, not just this stairwell, but the entire house. Blackwood Manor. It wasn't just a building, it was a trap. A sentient, predatory entity that had patiently waited, observing, learning my vulnerabilities, and then unleashing them upon me. The will. Promise of riches, it had all been bait. And I had taken it, hook, line, and sinker. My gaze drifted to the single, grimy window at the top of the stairwell, a sliver of gray sky visible through the grime. Outside, the world, I hadn't seen it clearly in weeks. The house had a way of blurring the edges of reality, of distorting time and space, making the outside seem like a distant, irrelevant dream. But now it was a beacon, a faint scratching sound. From below, delicate, like fingernails on stone. It grew louder, more insistent, then another and another, multiplying, converging. A symphony of tiny, unnerving sounds, all emanating from the darkness beneath my feet. My breath hitched. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I squeezed my eyes shut for a fleeting second, trying to banish the images that clawed at my mind, grasping tendrils, a suffocating embrace, the slow, inevitable dissolution of self. When I opened them, a subtle change had occurred, less absolute. A faint luminescence, a sickly green, pulsed just beyond the edge of my flashlight's beam. It wasn't light, not really. It was more like a stain, a deep internal glow that emanated from the very stone, and with it a new smell, sweet, sickly sweet, like decaying flowers masking the underlying rot. The scratching stopped. The humming subsided. A profound silence descended, heavier and more terrifying than the cacophony, waiting for me to make a move, waiting for me to fall. I turned, my movement stiff and jerky. My hand found the doorframe at the top of the stairwell, the solid wood a welcome contrast to the slick stone. I pulled, the old hinges groaning in protest. I stumbled out, my legs nearly giving way. The scent of dust and decay was familiar, comforting even after the putrid air of the depths. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept moving, my footsteps echoing unnervingly in the empty halls. The house seemed to sigh around me, a low, mournful creak of timbers, as if disappointed by my departure. But I was out of the stairwell. I was moving towards the main entrance, towards the sliver of gray sky. The promise of wealth, of a new life, had led me to the precipice of oblivion. I had survived. But the house, Blackwood Manor, it was still here. Its tendrils, though perhaps temporarily repelled, were still rooted deep within its foundations, waiting for the next fool to seek its treasures. Had I truly escaped, or had the house simply released me for now?